In. This is a presentation designed to cater a conversation between Senator Joni Ernst and you, Ms. Theresa Greenfield. We're certainly excited that you accepted the invitation and you are here. Joni Ernst declined this opportunity today. But we do want to thank James Lee for facilitating the opening of this Iowa Alliance. For the express purpose of having this conversation today, we thank him for advancing the ideals of democracy. We want to thank the media, of course, for coming today. And we want to certainly recognize and thank Terrence Hollingsworth for his vision, for having this conversation in Power North End. This is an historic event. And Ms. Greenfield, again, we're just appreciative for you accepting the opportunity to come back again. This is not a new opportunity for you to come to the Cedar Valley. You've been here before in September with the Cedar Valley Forum on Diabetes. That was a wonderful conversation. And then it's been brought to my attention that you helped give money to 5 neighborhood coalitions for National Night Out here in the Cedar Valley. Yeah, and so we think that's pretty remarkable. So again, we're very, very grateful that you are here. And as you can see, we are flanked by other moderators for this event today. To my left, we have Ms. Nivea Reyes-Rodriguez. And Nivea Reyes-Rodriguez is a devoted advocate for immigrant rights through community education, media engagement, and organizational outreach. She currently serves as Vice President of DREAM Iowa and as a Commissioner on the Waterloo Commission on Human Rights. To my right, we have Ms. Rochelle Chase. Ms. Chase is a Waterloo reporter for Iowa Starting Line, which is an online publication. And she is also the author of Creating the Black Utopia of Buxton, Iowa, and Lost Buxton. And so we're just very happy to have both of them today. And then yours truly, I have the distinct pleasure of serving as a local pastor of Jubilee UMC Freedom Center right down the road. You've been there, you've been past there. And I also serve as Director of Waterloo Commission on Human Rights. So we're very, very happy to serve in this capacity today. And I guess I will throughout the first question, we do want to focus on 4 critical areas: economic inclusion, healthcare, infrastructure, racial justice, but there may be a few other questions that are tossed around a little bit too. I think I will begin with one of those kinds of questions. First of all, I noticed when you came in, you did have on a Lakers banner on your mouth. Are you celebrating the national championship of the LA Lakers? No, this is a different Laker. Would you like to explain?
You know, congratulations to the Lakers for their national championship, but I am not celebrating them. This is, I am a proud alumni from Iowa Lakes Community College up in Esterville, and this is a mask representing them, and so I like to be a proud alum.
All right, well, you got the right colors.
I got the right colors, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's wonderful, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Can I just say thank you?
Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Nilvia, Rachel, Terrence, and James for organizing the event. Thank you for coming to have the conversation. It is good to be back in Waterloo. As you said, we've been here a number of times. We'll keep coming back to Waterloo. I learn something every time, and I look forward to it. But I also want to tell you just a little bit about me, if that's okay, because I have a feeling there's some folks that are going to watch tonight that haven't gotten a chance to meet me. Yeah, I'll take just a couple minutes, though. I'm a businesswoman. I've worked most of my career in small businesses, very small, from running bean walking crews on the farm where I grew up, to working my way up most recently to being the president of a small commercial real estate company. Small means we had 8 employees. So I think that's really typical, though. Iowa is a state of small towns and small businesses, just like that, just like so many of them in this neighborhood that I certainly have stopped by and seen. I'm a mom. I'm a mother of 4. I love being a mother of 4. I'm an empty nester mother of 4. That's even better, I will say. And I'm a military mom. And so I have a lot of respect for all of our sons and daughters and everyone who has served, that's for sure. And then, as I told you, I grew up on the farm. I grew up on one outside of a little town of 500. I had a high school class of 24, so it was pretty rural. But I loved it. People talk about learning to work hard on the farm. I just really remember learning to make things and fix things and like looking over my day and having a lot of satisfaction, and I still like to tinker, I will tell you that. But I was pretty lucky. My dad had a saying that I will never forget, and it was, there's no boy jobs and there's no girl jobs. There's just jobs that need to get done. And that is how I've always approached life. I just see things as a job that needs to get done. So on the farm, I liked helping him with the flying service, that he was a pilot. That was a fun job. I hated helping cleaning the barns, the brown smelly stuff. Didn't like that job at all. But I think Washington has a lot of jobs we need to get done too. And they're not getting done, and we need people that will work with anyone to get those jobs done. And certainly right here in Iowa and across this country, we're all going through some pretty tough times, whether it's the pandemic and the horrific health outcomes. People are losing family members, the economic crisis from it. Farm bankruptcy rates are at an 8-year high, so folks are going bankrupt. That's horrible. Unemployment rates, unprecedentedly high. So we have tough times in front of us, and I have been through some tough times myself. When I graduated from high school, that was the start of the farm crisis, and I watched families go bankrupt. My parents barely made it through that. They had to sell their crop dusting business, and they had to sell their hogs, and they never farmed again, and all of us kids left the rural area. And I think from there, we saw a lot of the hollowing out of rural America with schools closing and grocery stores closing and all of that going on. Put myself through college, community college, go Lakers. And then I also was widowed at the age of 24 and had to get busy rebuilding a life. And I didn't do that by myself. I got back on my feet with a real help of Social Security, that hard-earned benefit, and my husband was a lineman for the power company. He was an IBEW member, and so his union benefits helped, plus my family, plus my friends, plus my town, people that put their arms around me and helped me get back on my feet and on my way to getting that first job, to providing for my family again as a single mom. So when I say I got in this race to put Iowa first and put hardworking families first, I want you to know where that comes from for me and where my heart is and where my efforts are. So I'm thrilled to be here today. I will tell you, at our debate on Thursday night, my opponent in this race said that she did not believe there was systemic racism, and I think that's wrong. I think that Black and brown communities have suffered for generations from discrimination, and that has built the systemic racism we have. And I'm here today to learn and to listen and have conversation with you so that if I'm your next senator, we've met one another and can roll up on our sleeves and begin to take some action. We know there's research out there, and we can have more conversation, but we also need to take action. And so I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for your patience and letting me just introduce myself, Reverend. And I'll kick it back to you to get the conversation going.
Yeah. Oh, well, that was exciting. We appreciate you sharing some of those insights. Speaking of which, woman of faith, and does your faith in any way make it difficult for you to support the LGBTQI community?
Well, Reverend, I absolutely am a woman of faith. I was raised Catholic, raised my boys Catholic, and in no way does it keep me from supporting the LGBTQI community. As a matter of fact, I have both a brother and a sister who are gay and lesbian, and I got to help host their weddings. I was so thrilled. And really, really want to make sure that we continue to work on issues that support that community. One, we need to pass the Equality Act, and that's something at the federal level that certainly will help. We need to ban conversion therapy. Absolutely has to come to an end, and I'm, in addition to that, going to continue to build relationships, listening and learning, so I can support all of our communities as best I can.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Ms. Nivea.
Yes. Excuse me. So I'm going to take this off just while I ask the questions. And I'm glad you talked about rural Iowa, rural America, really, because I think my background being in immigration, right? I think specifically here in Iowa, immigrants have revitalized a lot of rural communities. New Hampton, where I grew up, Muscatine, Storm Lake, Postville, prior to the raid, it's really building those local economies. And immigration reform increases earnings of all Americans, like reform that includes citizenship or a pathway to citizenship within 5 years, increases the general earnings of all Americans by $618 billion over the next decade. So it also increases GDP by 1.1 trillion in that same time frame. So do you support bills, specifically like HR 6 that was passed in the House last year? That was the American Dream and Promise Act of 2019. And other bills, so that bill targets specifically what's considered dreamers, youth that were brought here as children, right? But other bills, other measures as well for comprehensive immigration reform that includes the 11 million and not just those 800,000 or whatever that number is.
Well, Nilvia, thanks so much for coming out today. It's nice to meet you. And being a student, too. Thank you for coming here today. Well, I do believe we need to modernize our immigration system and to have comprehensive immigration reform. And it comes from certainly my own beliefs, but also traveling the state. I think you left out Denison and Perry and a few other places that I've been to that have really strong immigrant communities. But the bottom line is I know how to welcome immigrants, and we've been doing it for a long time, and we want to do it more. And Republican Governor Bob Ray showed us how to do that so many years ago when he welcomed refugees to our state, and we need to get back to those principles in our state. I will tell you, it doesn't matter where I go. Immigration is one of the #1 topics I hear about. Iowans want reforms. I can be talking to the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance. I can be talking to Egg Council. I can be talking to nonprofits and faith communities, immigration advocates. I met with a number of them down in the Davenport area, for example. I can be talking to police chiefs who absolutely want the reform. So there is a bipartisan group called the Iowa Compact on Immigration. I think they have some good ideas that they're looking at. I'm not saying it's exclusively what I would do. But 3 things I think we need to focus on. Modernizing the whole system, starting with visa reforms for sure, and that entire process and path to becoming a citizen. That has to be shortened up, and we have to make sure we're absolutely welcoming people with all skills so that we have a robust economy and robust communities. Second, we have to be safe, absolutely. But we can be safe, we can be strong, and we can be smart. And to me, we have to look at our ports of entry in particular. So certainly, safety is important. And then finally, it has to be humane. We have to keep our families together. So when it comes to our dreamers, absolutely, we have to make sure that they have their path to citizenship, and it can't be taken away. We have to codify it, and it should be very short. But their families need to be with them also. And so we have to look at the whole system on how we move people from an undocumented status to becoming and getting on their path to citizenship also. You mentioned it, the economic benefits, but I know here in Iowa it is hundreds of millions of dollars right now that our immigrants are providing to our economy. It is an incredible amount of resources. So I'm excited to roll up my sleeves and work on that, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Greenfield. The next question will come from Ms. Rochelle.
Yes, Ms. Greenfield, in your introduction, you talked about Social Security and how that helped you, when your first husband had died, and you have 2 young children, one on the way. And you've stated that this is important to you today. Well, we have a lot of people on fixed income here in Waterloo and elsewhere, and that depend on Social Security. And so I'm just curious, what specifically do you mean by protecting Social Security? I mean, how do you envision doing that?
Well, let me start by a couple things I wouldn't do. I wouldn't have passed a tax bill that increased our debt $2 trillion, gave the majority of that benefit to the largest corporations and the wealthiest, because I believe they need to pay their fair share, but it now threatens Social Security and Medicare in particular, and has certainly reduced their trust funds by a year or 2 in terms of their value. So that's been a bad move when it comes to Social Security. But things that I would like to do are make sure that we're working together with anyone across the aisle to sustain it for generations. My opponent talks about privatizing Social Security, going behind closed doors to gut it. Most recently proposed some payroll tax cuts, which would defund Social Security, and even Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said that's not a good idea, because it's not a good idea. And to your point, as I travel the state, I run into and meet many, many people that Social Security is their only income. I met a woman who lives up in Lake Mills, Iowa, and I think she gets by on $800 a month. $800 a month. And so sustaining Social Security, well, one, whenever I look at tax policies, I'm going to make sure that it doesn't get changed so it negatively impacts hardworking families, our middle-class families. Again, looking to make sure that the very wealthiest and the corporations are paying their fair share. And then I just look at bigger and broader things too that we can do that improve our economic situation, like requiring Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs. That'll put a few bucks back into our seniors' pockets. And it's estimated will save us as taxpayers about $500 billion. And that's no small chunk of change. Two, I think we have to end tax breaks and loopholes that have allowed the largest corporations to ship their jobs overseas. We need those jobs here, and that will help us rebuild a robust economy. And of course, that helps us out financially too. And then finally, if we dig deep, I'm sure there's lots of these items, and I'm looking forward to learning more. But I know that there's tax credits that the big pharma gets, so they can run TV ads, and we need to eliminate those kinds of things so that we use those dollars for programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at.
Thank you. And so just to be clear also that with all these other changes and all these improvements that you're making, they will in by no means like cut Social Security.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, I won't vote for that. And I'm not going to support, raising the age by any means. And I will tell you a couple things that I think are incredibly important. One, there's the SWIFT Act, which would ensure that all surviving spouses receive their full benefits. And then as someone who went to Social Security office to apply, I went back oftentimes to get help. We have to keep those offices open, those frontline workers in our communities that help not just seniors, but our disabled members, young widows, through those processes, keep them open, reducing wait times. I think just making that service even more efficient for all of us, Iowans and Americans, is important too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Ms. Greenfield, I thought it was attributed to Ashley Henson, but I think she said everyone doesn't want health care. And everyone that I know not only wants it, but they need it. And they think of it, quite frankly, as more of a right. They don't think it should be attached to their jobs. So I guess I'm curious to know, what is your position on health care and how available it should be to everybody in these United States of America?
Well, thank you, Reverend. Healthcare is the #1 issue that I hear about as I travel the state. And I've done, again, over 300 campaign events now. We are working hard to meet Iowans where they're at, either on the road on days like this, or for folks that are staying home, teletown halls or Zoom meetings, just really working to meet everybody in 99 counties. Healthcare is #1. And generally, it's related to costs. Premiums, deductibles, out-of-pocket expenses, seniors who are getting gouged for prescription drug costs. It's mental health care. It's addiction care. It's access. So rural hospitals, rural care, declining labor and delivery units. It's maternal mortality rates, which, by the way, are absolutely skyrocketing for the Black community compared to any other community. So there's lots of work to do on healthcare. I want to get started on this, enhancing and strengthening the Affordable Care Act. There's a lot of good tools in the toolbox there. I say that all the time because there are. But we've also learned some things about it. One, those essential services, we have to keep all of them, whether it's your protections for pre-existing conditions, whether it's a coverage for prescription care or maternity care, whether it's working to get that donut hole a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller for our seniors. But it's also Medicaid expansion. And Medicaid expansion has not only covered an additional 150,000 Iowans, it has been a lifeline to our hospitals, and I'm just going to go on a limb and say our rural hospitals in particular. It's been a lifeline. I stopped at both the Boone County Hospital, took a tour, but then also the Sioux City Community Health Center. And at both those locations, Medicaid expansion has been critical to keeping their lights on. And then the thing we didn't do, but that we do need to do, is add that public option in. So absolutely everybody has an option, everyone. And everyone can be and should be covered. And it has to be affordable. And then we have to work on that accessibility piece also. What I like about a public option is it will create competition and hopefully level that playing field and help push those costs down for all of us. And then I would just dovetail one more time, requiring Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug costs, bring those down. Now, my opponent refuses to support that, and I've got a good idea why. I think she has sold seniors out for her big pharma donors. She's taken over $200,000 from big pharma and then refuses to require that kind of negotiation, which would help Iowans, help Americans. And I say enough is enough to that kind of thing. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
Can we just ask one follow-up on that, though? The
Sure.
Affordable Care. Just when you say strengthening the Affordable Care Act, can you just give an example of what you mean by that?
Well, one of the things I mean is adding that public option in.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
I think
that would be for people who don't have a job, and so they can actually get employment and get insurance on their own. When you say public option, what do you mean by that?
So a public option, one, would be another choice to be able to enroll and get insurance. Absolutely, if you're not covered through employer plan, or maybe you prefer the public option plan, it would be available to everyone, at least how I see it today. And it would make sure that, for example, I have talked to many people, and particularly people living in rural areas. I talked to a gentleman who's got a great idea for a startup, but he has that day job because they get their health insurance through the company that he's working for. But he wants to start his startup business, but wouldn't be able to have insurance. He could take the public option and move on to being the entrepreneur that we need our economy to encourage. So I see the public option as providing a lot of things. One, for folks who maybe don't have an option today, but also spawning entrepreneurship, folks that maybe are staying in a job because of the health insurance, but now they'll have an option, I think would be fantastic. So I think it's going to serve us well in a lot of different ways and situations for individuals. Goal is to make sure everybody has coverage, because I believe healthcare is a right for all of us.
That's great, that was great. Here's a second follow-up question to the same piece, and
All
then we go
right.
to Ms. Nivea. But I think I stumbled across your Black Maternal Health Momnibus Act. You want to explain that to all these Black mothers in Northern?
Well, that's not my act, but yeah, I mean, I'm a mother of 4. I've given birth to 3 of those 4. I'm a little hot under the collar that our maternal mortality rates are going up in this country, certainly in Iowa, but in particular for our Black moms. And I actually hosted a forum one evening. It was an online forum to just have that conversation. We had one OBGYN who's also teaches at the University of Iowa join us, and 2 nurse practitioners. One was, I believe, a nurse practitioner midwife, to just have that very conversation about moms and their babies and some of the steps that we can take or the work that they're doing to reduce those and bring those rates down. Now, you can fact check this, because I may not be right, but I believe the University of Iowa just received a grant, and I think they're partaking with a number of other states to begin to understand why the rates are going up and the kinds of steps we can take to reduce it. You know, whether that's more racial bias training within the medical program. One of the ideas that the leaders that joined me discussed was making sure that moms it's mandatory they be kept on their health insurance. For whatever reason they might lose it, that they have to have it for at least a year after the baby's born, because that is really the time that's most critical when it comes to their mortality rates, which I, was happy to learn. So, and then there's a Black Momnibus bill that would accomplish some of those things. Thanks for asking. Yeah, because I bet you had a great mom.
I did. Ms. Nivea?
Dr. Funches mentioned in my intro, I'm Vice President of Dream Iowa. It's a nonprofit organization. One of our goals, or our vision, is to stimulate and carry forward the shift from generational poverty to generational wealth for immigrant Iowans. But that's a reality that exists for not just immigrant Iowans, Black Americans, and all, a lot of Iowans here too. And then as also part of a younger generation that believes in much more progressive policies, we hear a lot, that we want to work across the aisle, and we certainly do. We have to stop creating this division in Washington. But a lot of the progressive policies that my generation and younger generations, future voters, right, want are these progressive policies like raising the minimum wage, making college more affordable, things that will help to bridge that gap of income inequality, which is really, really stark here in the United States. So what specific measures or bills or anything do you support to do that, to create generational wealth for all Americans?
Well, Nilvia, you're singing my tune, if you don't mind. Let's start out with, you said making college more affordable. First and foremost, I think that Democrats talk about four-year college too much, and I love four-year college. However, I would like to make sure trade schools, technical schools, and community colleges are debt-free. Find a way for them to be debt-free so that every single student, whether you are coming out of high school, has a path that encourages you to take that path, to begin to build skills, or get down the first 2 years of your general eds, whatever your dream is. We're growing our workforce. We'll be making sure people have skills that they can then go on to start their own small businesses or fill so many of the vacancies we have in terms of jobs right now. So debt-free community college, trade schools, technical schools. I always give a plug to apprenticeship programs too. My first husband was a lineman for the power company. He was an IBEW member. He completed their apprenticeship program and became a journeyman. The fun thing about apprenticeship programs, so cool, you earn while you learn. On day one of your apprenticeship, you start collecting a paycheck while you're learning. And those wages just go up every year and on and on. So apprenticeship programs, and I would like to find a way to tie them back into our high schools, our trade schools into our high schools, our technical schools into our high schools, so that if you are interested in welding, and I know some places do, but you can get started on that as a junior, as a senior, and start down that path, absolutely. So that's something that I'm excited about and want to focus on. And then I think it also helps folks who maybe are coming back for retraining, whether you get a bump in the road like I did and needed to get back to some training, or whether your industry changes and you need to get back for some retraining. That debt-free path, make sure that you continue to be on that path for providing for yourself and being able to buy a home, right, and build that wealth that you're talking about. Then the second item was raising the minimum wage. Well, we have to raise the minimum wage. You cannot feed a family on $7.25 an hour. You absolutely cannot do that. And I support raising that minimum wage over time, up to $15 an hour. But I will tell you, my larger focus really is on making sure that we're creating a pathway for living wages. So that investment in education, and I also support universal pre-K at the beginning, so that every child is ready for school and that their success rate going through our public school system is there, and then the debt-free afterwards. So really working hard to give everybody that chance. I put out one of my policy plans called Small Towns, Bigger Paychecks, and that's where I talk about the investment in school and then the investment in small businesses. We know that in Iowa, I think we have maybe a little less than 15,000 minority businesses. Most of them are unbanked, or it's difficult. They get denied loans at a much higher rate than any other businesses. But for all of our small businesses, most of them don't have enough line of credit or enough capital to get through a month or two of tough times. And yet half of Iowa's workforce works in small businesses like the one I ran, where we had 8 employees. So that capital is really important. So let me give you another example of how I think this really helps Iowa and our country. I met a young woman who lived in Rembrandt, Iowa, out in western Iowa. She was going to Iowa Lakes Community College in Emmitsburg, studying early family childhood education. And she told me her dream was to open a daycare center. We're 350,000 daycare slots short in this state, so I was delighted to hear that. But imagine if she could come out debt-free, and then if she could find access to capital. And then, of course, for childcare, we've got to work more collaboratively with our businesses, our communities, our school districts to build that care force. Because I think if we have a strong care force, childcare, we're going to have even a stronger workforce. But that's one way where I think you could see how we'd implement my Small Towns and Bigger Paychecks plan. And it can happen in rural communities. It can happen in urban neighborhoods. It can happen all over the state. But I want to invest, again, back in education. So thank you for, I don't think I missed any other question. I tried to take a note here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up question?
No, just, I think, like, are there other policies on, or ideas that you have for bridging that gap, that income inequality gap, right?
Yeah,
Versus, to the, struggling.
I think it's education. It is. I think that I have talked to too many young folks who are in high schools. Matter of fact, I was down in Red Oak at an event, and 2 high schoolers came, and I asked them, well, what are you doing when you get done? Where are you going next? No place. Why not? Well, it's going to cost too much money to go on. What if I don't know what I want to study, and then I spend those dollars, and then I drop out, and now I have debt and no credentials, no skill. And yet, I believe every year you wait to go on, it's harder and harder to go back. I hear those stories too much, so I'd like to remove that barrier to cost to get into trade schools, technical schools, community colleges, so that people get on the path of earning living wages. I also want to push those apprenticeship programs. Here's what happened. My husband was making, my first husband, great wages as a union electrician. We had fantastic benefits. We were saving for a dignified retirement, so there was retirement that came with that. And then we were saving to buy our first home because of those things and because of his apprenticeship program. And so that path, I think, is one of the very best paths. After that, we do have to take a look at how we end systemic racism, though, in lending, right? So people aren't denied loans at a higher rate. In housing, we used to have redlining. We can't let anything like that happen again. In healthcare, in education. So it shouldn't matter what zip code you're in. Those are some of the things I want to work on to help with that inequality gap. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Along those lines, we're noticing here in Waterloo, and there's been investment dollars that have been allocated for redevelopment of some areas here in Waterloo, like, for example, the Walnut neighborhood. Then there's other areas that are not getting it, like We Care, which has like some of the black businesses. And so they've kind of been left out. So I guess my question is, what will you do to ensure that, black business districts like, We Care also get redevelopment dollars, have access to that?
Mm-hmm. All right, Rochelle, thank you. So after my first husband died, I went back to college, and what I studied was community planning. And I worked for about 14 years with neighborhood groups, planning commissions, city councils, town boards, county boards. One thing I learned immediately was that the problems we have to solve, they're not Republican or Democratic problems. Pothole in the middle of the street is just a problem that has to be solved. And so that is definitely my work ethic and my attitude when it comes to economic development and even just policy making in general. I know that for the Walnut neighborhood, the We Care neighborhood, a lot of those decisions are made locally with the city, and probably some of those economic development grants may funnel through the state. But one of the things I would like to do at the federal level, which we haven't done for a number of years, and I don't know exactly how long, is we need to get back to having a USDA undersecretary for rural development. So rural states like ours, we have to have someone at the federal government that's advocating for those programs and speaking up on behalf of rural development. And when I say rural development, this is Iowa. So that there are those dollars that can go back to communities, maybe directly to communities, to help minority businesses, minority neighborhoods, and focus on those. Your situation that you mentioned to me, or this example, is not uncommon. I have heard that around the state also, that neighborhoods or communities would like the opportunity to develop their plan and have resources that meet their needs, as opposed to maybe a plan that's said if you fit in this box, then you can get resources, as opposed to this is what our community and neighborhood needs, and how can we get some resources to help us achieve that and grow the businesses and, of course, make our communities more vital. So, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking about infrastructure, though, there's a $1.5 trillion-dollar infrastructure bill on the table right now, and to my understanding, we think that a lot of that is allocated or looked at, for rural Iowa. And when we say rural in this sense, we're really talking about rural, the farms.
Okay.
And nobody's really talking about, downtown Waterloo or the Walnut, We Care neighborhoods, for instance, right along this business corridor that used to be very, very vibrant here. And I guess we want to know, what can you guarantee, for instance, if you were elected as senator, that you would bring more attention, for instance, to the digital divide and making sure that urban areas actually get more of those kinds of monies? Because it has been mentioned here before, this was a very vibrant business district at one time before. And when the riots occurred in 1968, there was white flight, and people went on the west side of town, and this side of town remained underdeveloped. What guarantees can you make here today as you reflect upon such a thought?
Mm-hmm. Well, Reverend, absolutely yes is the answer to that. I'll be advocating for that, breaking down that digital divide. And truly, if there's one thing I've been throwing a few elbows and disappointed in both parties on, it's the lack of investment in infrastructure. And I know that there is some talk of a bill right now, but we haven't gotten one done, and we haven't had a robust infrastructure plan really for 30 years. We need to get back to investing in our country with infrastructure, whether it's roads or bridges. The digital divide, though, is important. Our schools, rebuilding communities like this, making sure those resources are there. And I'll tell you, as I travel the state, I've also had the chance to meet with mayors around the state, talk to a lot of mayors. And infrastructure is a really big deal, but it's not all one size fits all. Some mayors are talking about the basics of water and sewer. Some are talking about needs for economic development, maybe dollars to invest in environmental cleanup so that they can reuse locations, buildings. There's not a one size fits all there, but we're also 50th in the nation in bridge suitability here in Iowa. We've got the worst bridges in the country, and we need to get those fixed. We need to invest in our locks and dams so that they can accommodate and be climate resilient, whether it's flooding or drought, by the way. They both are happening more frequently. But COVID, again, has absolutely put a spotlight on those that have high-speed internet and those that do not. And the numbers are pretty stark. And they certainly affect the black and brown communities much more than they affect white communities. They affect farmers. I talk to many who don't have high-speed internet, who aren't able to participate in precision farming, for example. So this is an investment we need to make so that our economy can grow and compete and hopefully win on the world stage.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm just sensitive to time. I'm just curious now if Hollinsworth is anywhere around. Are there any other questions that might come from the audience?
Yeah, there was a couple of people that had questions, and I know Bridget, I think, said she had one, so
Okay.
if you guys would come right there, and Bridget, you go right there, you can ask questions you were going to ask.
So, just throughout this whole election cycle, one thing that we've really tried to focus in on is people come to actually engage us in this community, not just as Black people, but as just regular citizens around here. You know, we're not elected officials, we don't have any fancy titles around here. We're just ordinary people living within this community who a lot of times in these processes feel left out, feel like we're not important, feel like it's not important for people to really come to us so that we can, you know, even feel like they care enough to just come talk to regular people. And so just wondering for you personally, how important is it to you to actually go engage regular people like myself? And have you done that throughout this cycle? And just how important is that to your campaign? Because it doesn't seem like it's that important to most people.
Well, I can't speak to most people, but I can speak to me. We have done over 300 events around the state. Small events like this, big events, We've traveled the state, we're gonna continue to travel the state physically, but especially during COVID, people are staying home, and we have been working incredibly hard to reach out and connect. Whether, for example, it's hosting forums that are based on a topic. It could be rural development, it could be small businesses. As a matter of fact, we had a couple folks from right here in Waterloo that tuned into that small business evening, whether it's maternal mortality health, meeting with University of Iowa Student Association, lots and lots of forums online, of course, and continuing to meet. It's the best part of campaigning. I love it, is getting out to meet folks. So Bridget, I'm glad you came out today, and we will continue to travel and stay in touch, and using all kinds of tools to make that happen. And then lastly, don't ever let anybody tell you you're not important. We're all important.
Yes.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
Great question.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Campbell. And
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
My name is Sandra Campbell.
Sandra.
And I work in healthcare.